The following clip is a film version of a PowerPoint presentation I prepared in 2006 after the release of the movie The Da Vinci Code. The film, as you may recall, was based on Dan Brown's extremely popular and controversial novel. The heated controversy unleashed at that time concerned the assertion that Jesus Christ was secretly married to, or at least had an intimate relationship with Mary Magdalene, and that Mary was pregnant with their child at the time Jesus was crucified. This theory is actually centuries old, and interest in it had already been successfully reawakened several years previously in another best-selling book entitled The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. It describes how Joseph of Arimathea took the expecting Mary Magdalene under his wings, and in order to protect her from the persecutions of the early Christian era, brought her across the Mediterranean to the south of France, where her child was born. The book further tells of a secret society which was allegedly formed to protect the offspring and bloodline of the holy couple, and to preserve the secret of its existence throughout the ages. It asserts that this secret society is still in existence today. Dan Brown retells this legend in his novel, adding the claim that Leonardo da Vinci was one of a long line of grand masters of this secret society, and encoded its clandestine knowledge in his famous Last Supper fresco. This subject is still relevant for us today, because many families of today's ruling global elite trace their ancestry to a bloodline which is allegedly of the lineage of the Israelite King David, a prominent ancestor of Jesus Christ. I have already touched upon this subject in greater detail in another short film entitled Obama, Akhenaten, and the Temple of Solomon. Even if you are not interested in Dan Brown, in bloodlines, or secret societies, you will find that learning about the symbology of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, one of humanity's greatest art masterpieces, will be a valuable enrichment of your general education. So I hope you enjoy the following film version of my previous PowerPoint presentation entitled A Nonfiction Interpretation of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. This presentation is intended as a tool to help us differentiate between what is fiction and what may be true in the Da Vinci Code interpretation of the symbology of the Last Supper. Let us begin with the Da Vinci Code scene where the two fugitives are in the mansion of Sir Lee Teabing, who later turns out to be the villain teacher, as he begins interpreting the Last Supper symbology for Professor Langdon and Sophie Neveu. The first statement he makes is, "The scene is supposed to be depicting the breaking of bread and the blessing of the wine, the model for the communion. Yet there are no glasses of wine on the table. Not one glass of wine can be seen." This is not quite correct. As a matter of fact, there are indeed glasses of wine on the table, 12 of them to be exact. The wine glasses of each of the 12 apostles, with the exception of Peter's glass, which appears to be blocked by the figure of Judas, as well as Jesus' glass, can be seen in front of each of the figures. Leonardo's original fresco is unfortunately quite faded, so some of the finer details are difficult to recognize. Here we see a very well-preserved painted copy of the Last Supper, made during Da Vinci's time, in which the details are more easily recognizable. Of course, it seems surprising to us to see clear, transparent glasses depicted, which were not known in the 1st century AD when Jesus lived, but were already commonly used during the time of the Renaissance. The artistic custom of Da Vinci's time made no particular effort at historical accuracy. Ancient figures were almost always depicted wearing contemporary garments and in contemporary environments. The Florentine painter Domenico Ghirlandaio also painted a famous version of the Last Supper 15 years before Leonardo. Observing the details of Ghirlandaio's painting, we can see various kinds of transparent and translucent glassware depicted: drinking glasses, wine and water carafes, dipping bowls. This again illustrates the common practice of Italian Renaissance painters of using contemporary Venetian glass designs in their compositions. Specifically, Leonardo's work shows the moment after Jesus has announced that one of those sitting at the table will betray him. The 12 apostles react with various degrees of outrage and shock. The notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci name all of the disciples in the order in which they are shown, which is how we come to identify them. Leonardo grouped the apostles into 4 groups of 3. From left to right they are Bartholomew, James the Lesser, and Andrew form the first group of 3, all of them appearing surprised. Andrew holds both of his hands up in front of him in a frightened gesture. Leonardo identifies the second group of 3 as being Judas Iscariot, Simon Peter, and John. Judas is holding a bag of silver in his right hand, while reaching for a piece of bread with his left. The third group is made up of Thomas, James the Great, and Philip. These 3 appear in varying degrees of shock. Thomas with his hand raised, and Philip seemed to be requesting some sort of explanation, while James the Great, between them, appears to be recoiling from Jesus in horror. The last 3, Matthew, Jude Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, appear to be discussing the matter with each other. In a rendition of Luke 22, verse 23, they began to question among themselves which of them it might be who would do this. It would be helpful at this point to read the gospel accounts of the scene the painting depicts. From the Gospel of Luke. And he took bread and gave thanks, and broke it, and gave unto them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Likewise also the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you. But behold, the hand of him that betrays me is with me on the table. And they began to inquire among themselves which of them it was that should do this thing. From the Gospel of John. Verily, verily, I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. Then the disciples looked on one another, doubting of whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore beckoned to him that he should ask who it should be of whom he spoke. From the Gospel of Matthew. And as they did eat, he said, Verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them saying unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, He that dips his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. From the Gospel of Mark. And as they sat and did eat, Jesus said, Verily I say unto you, one of you which is eating with me shall betray me. And they began to be sorrowful, and to say unto him one by one, Is it I? And another said, Is it I? And he answered and said unto them, It is one of the 12 that dips with me in the dish. It is obvious that each of the 4 writers of the Gospels remembers the scene a little differently. Some describe certain details which the others omit. A synthesis of the accounts reveals these main points. Jesus expounds on the Jewish Kiddush, blessing of bread and wine, and introduces the later Christian sacrament of communion. He afterwards announces that one of the 12 will betray him. The disciples begin heatedly discussing among themselves who it could be. Some of them ask Jesus directly, Is it I? The idea comes up that Peter should ask John, who apparently had a particularly close relationship with Jesus, to ask the Master who the traitor is. Jesus apparently consents to give a sign in the form of an action he will take simultaneously with the traitor, involving the dipping of bread. Let us consider each of the above points individually as they are depicted in the painting. Jesus announces that one of the 12 will betray him. The presence of a traitor and his unknown identity is symbolized by the ownerless hand holding a knife. It is obvious that Da Vinci went to a great deal of trouble to make this symbolic device of the ownerless knife subtle, yet clearly recognizable. The sketch of the position of Peter's arm is the most detailed of all the preparatory studies Da Vinci drew for the Last Supper. The angle of the 2 arms in relation to each other also makes it obvious that Peter's arm on which he is leaning cannot be the arm holding the knife. Another quality differentiating the 2 arms is the color of the coat sleeves. The sleeve of Peter's coat is blue, whereas the sleeve of the arm holding the knife is brown. The disciples begin heatedly discussing among themselves who the traitor could be. The agitated movement among the figures, the discussion and the questioning is obvious. Philip is portrayed pointing to himself with a questioning gesture, as if saying, Is it I? James motions to Peter, who in turn whispers to John that he should ask Jesus to reveal the traitor's identity to them. Peter's motion is not threatening, as Dan Brown suggests in the Da Vinci Code, but seems rather to be the friendly, familiar gesture of someone who lays his hand on the shoulder of another to whom he feels close while speaking privately with him. Jesus gives a sign in the form of an action he takes simultaneously with the traitor, involving the dipping of bread. With his left hand, Jesus is showing a piece of bread, as if saying, This is my body, which is given for you, while his right hand is giving the sign by making a reaching motion at the same time as Judas. In his book, Dan Brown articulates a theory, which is repeated in the Da Vinci Code film, that the person sitting to the right of Jesus is in reality Mary Magdalene. He points out John's feminine appearance and the fact that he and Jesus are wearing complementary colors. John refers to himself several times in his gospel as the disciple who Jesus loved. There is another very old theory which interprets these references as indicating that there might have been a homosexual relationship between John and Jesus. Da Vinci himself, being homosexual, may have been expressing an adherence to this theory by depicting John as being very feminine. This could also be one explanation for the complementary colors he uses for the clothing of Jesus in John. It was, however, not unusual for medieval and Renaissance artists to give young men a feminine, delicate appearance. The depiction of the Apostle Philip is also very feminine. Furthermore, the root of the word loved, which John uses in these references, is agape, divine love, as opposed to philos, family love or friendship, or eros, sexual love. John was the youngest of the apostles, and it appears from other gospel episodes that Jesus had a somewhat fatherly or older brother-like relationship to him. This is brought out especially in the scene after the crucifixion, when Jesus, while still on the cross, speaks to his mother and John. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple standing by, whom he loved, he said unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. Then said he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour the disciple took her unto his own home. While our little study doesn't address Dan Brown's further Da Vinci Code theories concerning the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, it does make it clear that his suggestions of a Da Vinci connection and his interpretation of the symbology of the Last Supper are not based on accurate scholarship and seem to be, at best, purely fictional.